Hello and welcome to another episode of the podcast Confessions of a Nerdy Bible College Student. I'm your host, Luc Reed. Alongside me, my lovely co-host, Gwen Smith.
I am the hostess with the mostest.
That you are, Gwen. Today is a very exciting day as it is our second podcast, and this time, we actually have a guest. He might be sometimes called an arrogant heretic, but he's actually a great guy. Our friend, Albert Brewer.
Hello.
As a way of introducing our guest, I thought we'd start out by asking some of the questions we answered here last week to introduce ourselves. So, Albert, where did you grow up?
I grew up here in New Brunswick in a really small town called Perth Andover, New Brunswick, right on the border of Fort Fairfield, Maine.
Oh, wow. And when did you realize that you were, in fact, a nerd?
Well, I can't really put a specific date on when, but I remember when I was a kid, one of the first presents I got were Star Wars pajamas and computer parts for Raspberry Pi.
Excellent. And when, in fact, did you become a Christian?
Well, that's a long story, but when I became a Christian was nearing the end of my grade 12 year, right before I graduated. I was baptized in January 14th, 2015.
Excellent. And what made you decide to come to Kingswood?
Well, I had originally planned on going to another university to study astrophysics and calculus, but the Lord revealed to me very vividly a dream, and both a dream and a personal conviction that I should at least try to come to Kingswood. So, though I had planned on going elsewhere, I came to Kingswood, and the first week I was here, the Lord confirmed that I was here. I was to study theology, and other than that, the rest is kind of a mystery.
All right, excellent. So now that we know a little bit more about you, Albert, I think we're going to move on to our new segment, which, as a new podcast, that's pretty common, but I'm just wondering, what is it that has had you kind of nerdy this week? What have you been kind of nerding out about?
Well, this week I've been looking at computer parts in order to upgrade my computer so I can game more. And on top of that, I've really been going ham on League of Legends. So.
Excellent. And you, Gwen?
This week I've been spending a lot of time looking at really nerdy background noises or ambient noises. So I've been downloading a lot of Star Wars white noise.
I see. Excellent. So for me, probably the nerdiest thing I've been doing this week is just getting excited for Doctor Strange, which comes out tomorrow. And I have actually set up a time to go see it, and I got a group, and I got my car all ready, and I actually got paid this week, so I will have the funds and means to be able to do that, so really excited to go do that. So now we're going to move on to the topic of our show, which our good friend Albert was kind enough to supply with us. Take it away, Albert.
Okay, so this week, I guess, something I've been wrestling with is the whole idea of the disciplines and practices of the church. It has come to my attention through reading some historical theology and some of the early councils that there are a lot of things that the early church used to do that we no longer do within our Protestantism.
Yeah.
Things like the sign of the cross when we pray, kneeling, kissing the altar. I mean, these are stuff that the early church used to do all the time, and even the traditional churches like the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church, they still do that. And it's come to my attention that in our Protestantism, have we lost something when we move away from that? Like, this was the thrust of the early church. These were the things that the early church saw important enough to bring up into council and practice and to write about it and to justify themselves about. And it seemed that in our idea of trying to break away from the Roman Catholic Church, we've scrapped anything that's not necessary for salvation. We really went back to the basics, which is not necessarily bad, but I mean, all these things like I said, making the sign of the cross, or when you walk up and you see the cross. I know a lot of the Roman Catholic will bow before the cross. The priest will kiss the altar and carry the cross around the room and stuff. And that's just something that, I know, not necessary for salvation, but it has it must have some type of aspect for them to keep going. Like, not just traditionalism, but something they must get out of it.
Yeah, like the soul of it, yeah. What do you think, Gwen?
I've never really thought about that, actually. Like, I mean, I knew the differences between, say, Catholicism and Protestantism was that most Catholic churches do those type of things, but Protestant churches don't. But I think it's interesting to really think about that now.
Yeah. When I was first hearing about this concept, the first thing that came to my mind was, we as Protestants have kind of come away from Catholicism in that sense, but it kind of goes a little bit deeper than that, because like the Church and Catholicism, they have come away from our Jewish heritage, and there's a lot of Jewish tradition and a lot of Hebrew things that we don't do anymore. I mean, especially as Protestants, we don't even have anything traditional carried over from the Catholic Church, but from the Jewish, like the synagogues and the festivals and the celebrations and all those things. Like, I feel like we kind of are getting away from our roots, and kind of making it so that rather than upholding God in a sacred and holy place, he's become a little bit more commonplace, for the common man. Like, everybody, like, there's nothing wrong with God being available to everybody, because, no Jew nor Gentile, Greek, Hebrew, slave nor free, that whole thing. So, we all have access to God and what he has for us, but we have to be mindful of making sure that we still hold to the fact that it is a holy God that we serve, and it's, sanctified. There's got to be a reverence, and part of that is probably the idea that, like you kind of mentioned, the traditionalist type deal. We've kind of gotten to the point where traditions are bad, almost. And it's like, why is that?
Yeah, that's just like, what's wrong with having a little bit of tradition in it? Like, of course, these things that they do are not necessary for salvation. We're not saying that if you don't do them, you're going to be damned
to hell. Exactly.
Like, that's not what we're saying. But what we're saying is, like, what is wrong that after you pray, you make the sign of the cross? What is wrong with burning incense? What is wrong with having Jesus on the crucifix rather than just a cross? What's wrong with the pastor or the priest kissing the altar? There's nothing wrong with that stuff. People like to chalk it up to vain tradition and vain repetition, but we're the ones that make it vain. We are the one that make it like a mechanical thing. Rather than taking it and saying, oh, well, it's vain and it's old, and just ditching it, we should be like, well, the early church did this and churches still today use it. Instead of throwing it away, learn about it. Stop it from becoming vain instead of just throwing it away because it is vain.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, you bring up Jesus on the cross. That was actually something I was wrestling with for a long time while I was here, just because I looked at it as a negative thing. As a Protestant, I grew up Protestant, I grew up Wesleyan, so I saw it as a bad thing, but I was having a conversation with someone one day, and they were saying that it's because the Catholics are focusing on Christ's sacrifice, and that's something that gets kind of overlooked when you've got the empty cross, because from a Protestant perspective, it's like, why is Jesus on the cross? He's not on the cross anymore. He, sitting at the right hand of God. That's why, we think that he shouldn't be on the cross. But there is something to say about his sacrifice and what he did for us. So, and another thing I was going to say was that it might have something to do with the idea that part of sinfulness is this idea of ethnocentrism, where like we end up thinking that our ideals and our beliefs and our culture is the best. Like it's the center of the universe, and everything else is inferior compared to what we think. That's just something that many cultures, the Chinese and just many different cultures have had this worldview, and I think it can be kind of easy to fall into because we feel like because we're right and we have the right mindset, we know the true and real God, that it gives us the superiority and the right to do these things and say these things, and we can institute things and we can take things out if we want because we're God's people and we're right.
Yeah, even as you were saying, like, if we think about it, there's churches all around the world, and if we were to have some type of universal traditionalism, like I don't know, like kissing the altar or kissing the cross, or even liturgy, that's been passed down hands to hands since the early church, like, we may have our differences across culture, but if churches were to share the same type of traditionalist, like kneeling or something, then that's something I think that would unify us rather than divide us.
Yeah, definitely. Anything to add, Gwen?
I don't think so. Actually, most of the points that I've thought of, you brought up, like Jesus on the crucifix. So,
yeah.
I don't really have a lot of additional thoughts.
I think we fleshed it out a lot. We haven't come up with an answer, because it's not a very black and white subject. It's very, just more discussional type topic. And once, we hopefully have a following with this podcast, people can leave their thoughts as well in responses to the podcast.
We're just provoking the thought, prodding your minds.
Yeah. All right, I think that's just about all the time we have for tonight. Thank you so much for listening to us, even if we kind of rambled on at some points. Right now, we don't have any social media for the podcast yet, but we're planning on getting some stuff going soon. Just a reminder that this podcast isn't a product of Kingswood University. This is an independent project coming from us students as we finish our education and work to become leaders in the church. Next week, we'll have another topic, someone else to hang out with, and all that fun stuff. Until then, I'm Luc Reed.
I'm Gwen Smith.
And I am Albert Brewer.
And this is CNBCS. Stay nerdy, dive into the Word, and have a blessed week.